It's time for some astrology. It is 11:33 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesday, miércoles, Mercury's day. So it's time for a storytelling hour. Going to be shorter than an hour today. Got to bring the lad to his dad's for a trip that he's going to take. But I thought we could spend some minutes together to explore time and space, which is what happens here at Storytelling Hour. And I thought maybe we could do this by rolling the AstroDice. When I chose that title, I realized it had two meanings. One is just in our own lives, we take risks at times. We astrologers often try to keep those risks and decisions informed by aligning our actions, intentions, and even wishes with the harmonies of the heavenly spheres, right? But it doesn't always work out. So rolling the astro dice in that regard, we like to consider, I believe, that at least these dice are loaded in our favor if we are aligning with the heavenly harmonies, yes. But I also meant these things, right? So Venus Revive knows what's up. Love me some Astro Dice. Now, what are the Astro Dice? If you haven't heard of them, they are wonderful. There's typically three, and I only have two here, and that's all we're going to need for our play today. But the Astro Dice, and they've been around for longer than I have, I believe. I'm not sure if that's true. There's three 12-sided die. And so one has the 12 signs of the zodiac, like Leo and Aries and Gemini, as you see on your screen. Another has the 12 houses, differentiating 6 from 9 with 9 dot versus 6 dot, right? And then there's a third die that has the planets, as Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and the North Node and the South Node, right? And you can roll the 3 die and you get something like Taurus, Mars in the 11th, right? And so what do you do with that, right? The Astro Dice can be really amazing source for practicing delineation. Like, what do you think Taurus Mars in the 11th might mean? How might that express itself, considering that Uranus is in Taurus today as we are sharing? How might that influence your delineation? You can use the Astro Dice for divination, which is pretty amazing. Now, if you ask a question and you roll the dice and they say Taurus Mars in the 11th, you then have to, try to understand how that response has anything to do with the question that you asked. And sometimes that can be a very tricky thing. But sometimes it can be amazingly powerful. And I'll say I've had some very powerful experiences with the Astro Dice, especially back in the day when I used to tour around and do astrology talks all the time, which is what I did. Afterwards, I'd typically be staying at somebody's house, where I gave a lecture, or who knows, right? And we'd have a group of star students around. Maybe we'd go outside and work the sky a little bit. And, people ask about their charts. And usually at that point, I had done enough deep dive astrology that I didn't necessarily want to go there. It's also really important that we have good boundaries around that, right? So say, let's just roll the dice instead. But it would get deep. We'd laugh and cry and all the things, like the Astro Dice can be crazy powerful. So by the way, if you want to order some Astro Dice, I don't know if this is still true like it was when I bought this set, or this 2/3 of a set, and a set that I know is complete on the other side of that wall. But when I did, the best price I could find was on Etsy. So literally half the price or even better than what I was seeing in other places online. So don't sleep on Etsy when you're shopping for your AstroDice. Well, let's roll the dice. And here we're going to use the dice in a very different way. And I will ask you all to participate. We have a few professional astrologers on hand, I see, which is fantastic. And the AstroDice are a way to approach the truth that, as I like to say, there's actually 144 houses in the wheel of life. So some of you are currently enrolled in the Cosmic Keys of the Heavenly Houses course that I've been teaching since March 20th. We have our last of 5 sessions tomorrow. By the way, I will speak about the AstroDice tomorrow, as I did in our community discussion group last Saturday, and will again in our final discussion group this Saturday. But as you've heard me say many times, and will again, which is redundant, but very, I think, supportive of the statement, redundancy is built into every great space mission. Learn that from NASA. So what do I mean by 144 houses? Well, what is the 7th of the 7th? And the answer is the 1st. What? And by the way, for those of you who have spent time studying our sister craft of musical harmony, this kind of cosmology, if you will, like the 7th of the 7th, won't be too strange. We often speak about the 5th of the 5th, for example, in music. It's a very common kind of harmonic tool. So if you're in the key of C, the 5th is G, C, D, E, F, G. Well, the 5th of the key of G, G, A, B, C, D, is D. So the 5th of the 5th from C is D. Now you could just say that's the 2nd because C, D. So why wouldn't you do that? Because harmonically, we often will move in fifths, right? And moving first from C to G and then from G to D, or even just going from C to D, but instead of considering it going to the 2nd, or in jazz we'd call that the 9th, going to the 5th of the 5th, it actually, you're going to the same place, but it implies something different from a harmonic perspective as far as how music is established in such a way that it has a harmonic journey, like moving through a chord progression. Now, I kind of digress, and I'm getting a little deeper into that sister craft of musical harmony than I need to for this example. But those of you who have studied music, and especially have studied harmony, will know where I'm coming from on that. And that type of study in my life, which has not nearly been as deep as my astrological study. In fact, studying astrology has really helped me understand harmony in a way that I had a hard time with before. Because in the Western harmonic tradition, 12 keys. Now there's other traditions with many more, but in Western tradition, 12 keys, 12 semitones in an octave. And so it's very easy to relate those 12, A, B, flat, B, C, etc., to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And then we can take our astrological knowledge and bring it to our harmonic study. We can bring our harmonic knowledge and bring it to our astrological study. And so in that latter, it's just kind of very easy for me to understand or to contemplate how the 9th house, for example, is the 5th of the 5th. Well, who cares? Astrologers do. If you came in worried about your grandchild, right? Let's say your grandchild was in the hospital. You might be surprised to find that instead of me asking for your grandchild's chart, I'm just looking at the 9th house on yours. Why the 9th? because the child is the fifth. And of course, your grandchild is the child of your child. So the fifth of the fifth, right? So we go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right. So grandchildren show up in the same place, interestingly, as the pilgrimage and spirituality, religion, and higher study, and other interesting things like this, publishing, like ninth house themes. But it's one of the places where we really start understanding what we call derived houses. The genius of turning the wheel. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have Aries rising. It's the easiest example we can come up with, right? Then Leo is the fifth, right? Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, right? Leo is the fifth of Aries, I like to say, or Leo is the fifth in the Aries design or of the Aries design, right? Well, what's the fifth of Leo? Now, we can just look from the fifth and get to the ninth, but you can also take the chart and turn it so that now Leo is at the ascendant, right? I have tons of illustrations, like literally right in a window next to the window I'm seeing my own face on. But I'd rather you do this in your mind's eye, in your inner screen. Anyway, in class, we'll look at the images, and maybe I'll bring in this example too. The fifth of the fifth is the ninth. The fifth of the ninth is the first. In other words, you are the child of your journeys and of your learnings. Anyway, so if we take a chart and just turn the wheel, like let's say we take an Aries rising chart, but now we just turn that wheel so that Leo's rising, then you get to look at life through the eyes of your fifth house, which is looking through the eyes that are full of the hearts of romance. But it's also like looking at the world through the eyes of your child. Now, of course, your child, and maybe you have children, or maybe you don't, they have their own charts. They have their own entrance moment. They have their own intentions here for incarnation, etc. Yes? But in your design, there's also a place of children. Now, if you don't have biological children, there's an interesting question about adopted children, which I would suggest is still the fifth. Some even say, like, my dog Isabel's in my fifth house because I love her so much. Love her like a child. That's an interesting contemplation because astrology typically puts smaller animals like dogs in the sixth house, not the fifth. But what about, the business I birthed? It's probably the 10th house, which is works. But it's also something I birthed. What about the songs I write? Got a great song about Hey Daddy Loves You that I sing to my child. Isn't that song my child too? Right? So what about your creations and just the fifth in general, your passions, right? So let's just say that, right? Let's say you have like heart-shaped sunglasses. And when you put them on, you're looking through the rose-colored lenses and they're heart-shaped and you just see the world through your own passionate eyes. Everybody's beautiful. There's other words for that too, right? You're looking through the eyes of your fifth house, right? And so, by the way, if you look through the eyes of your fifth, then you become the ninth. What? Because the first, who is you? You're not your sun sign. You're not your moon. Yes, you're those things too. But you are your rising sign. You are your ascendant. You are your horoscope. Horoscopos, Greek for the ascendant, and even the rising degree, right? That's like a huge shift from the contemplations or suggestions of modern astrology, which typically teach that the first is just some mask you wear. Well, I don't think that's wrong. I just say that the mask is your human experience because you're so much more than that. You are all that ever was, is, and will be. Now, that's my religion. But I'm the child of my religion because, of course, the first is the fifth of the ninth. So let's go back to this easier example. Who is your partner's partner? Well, I hope it's you. And there's other ways to play that game, and triangles and all sorts of things in business are often owned by more than two. Who's to say? But let's just say you're in a marriage. Who is your spouse's spouse? And the answer is you. Astrologically, that truth is found in the seventh of the seventh is the first, because the first is you, the seventh is your partner. Who is your partner's partner? You. You are the first, right? So you just take your wheel. Let's choose another rising sign. Anyone, please. Well, actually, you know what? Let's ask the oracle. So we have the die here. I'm just going to roll it. We got Aries. Okay, fine. Then we're going to roll this one too, the houses. And I get 8. And the answer is, what is the 8th of Aries? Some people prefer the language, what is the 8th from Aries? I always prefer, what is the 8th of Aries? Again, I think that's more related to the musical harmony study. And I just like to think that the Aries design is different than the design of Scorpio. Thank you, Winter. Winter, you've become so proficient with this, and I'm proud of it, frankly. So let's say Scorpio. Let's say you were born Scorpio rising instead of Scorpio everything else, like Kay and Michelle here. So for Scorpio rising, who is the 7th? And the answer is Taurus, right? So in a Scorpio rising chart, traditionally, you are actually identified by Mars. You are the child of Mars. Now, there's some astrologies, even in the old school approach, that would disagree depending on where Mars is placed in the nativity. But generally speaking, if you have a Scorpio horoscope, from the traditional point of view, this isn't a Pluto thing, right? Then you are a child of Mars. Mars is the lord of your horoscope, to use the old language. Or I prefer this term because the ascendant was also called Oiox, which means the rudder of the ship, the journey of life. If you have a Scorpio rudder, then Mars is your steersman. And Venus would represent your partner. Why? Because in the Scorpio design, Taurus is setting, and that, of course, is Venus's sign, right? Well, who's the partner of your partner? You can just turn the wheel, right? And this is like a really wonderful thing to do. If you want to see the world through your partner's eyes, just take your chart and turn it 180 degrees. So now your 7th is on the rise. And by the way, this kind of framework really, I shouldn't say only, but from an astronomical point of view, kind of only works from equal houses or whole sign houses. And the dice, they really only work from whole signs or equal houses as well, right? So for example, I was born with Gemini rising and an Aquarius midheaven. So my midheaven is not in the 10th sign of the Gemini design, which is Pisces. This is not atypical for Northern Hemisphere born natives. Gemini rising is more often than not paired with an Aquarius midheaven. So my midheaven is in my 9th whole sign. And that can be a rather confusing thing, but it's one of the reasons why I really encourage students, though I typically cast Placidus house charts, I'm also always glancing through equal house cosmology and whole sign cosmology. And I'll use some other house systems too, because I call myself Gemini Brett. And so try to do it all. All right. So Scorpio rising, Taurus setting. Like nobody's going to deny that, right? When Scorpio is rising in the east, Taurus, of course, on the opposite side is setting in the west. To be more specific, when Scorpio is rising in the southeast as Scorpio does, then Taurus is setting in the northwest, exactly opposite. Well, just turn the wheel, put Taurus at the ascendant, and now Scorpio is the 7th, right? But you can use your own chart, and now you're kind of looking at the world through the eyes of the other. And it might not be beautifully displayed by somebody that you're currently in relationship with. Or maybe you're not in relationship at all. And relationship is not, of course, it's not only intimate mating relationships. Though parents, children, grandchildren, as we were observing before, bosses, employees, friends, they're like enemies, depending. They live in different places on the wheel. So the seventh is a partner, and that's the word I actually use for the seventh, partners. And in some ways, we say anybody that you're in bed with, quote unquote. So this is like business partners too. When your income and your dice rolls is tied to theirs, right? Like that's a whole different ball of wax. Okay. So I think we can all agree that the seventh of the seventh is the first. And so what I'm saying there is that, the first is you, and it is also the seventh of the seventh. It is also the 11th of the third, which hopefully means you are here to assist your siblings with hopes and dreams. It is also the 5th of the ninth, which means you are the child of your own journeys. The 9th of the 5th, which means that in some ways I should say that you ought to be the guru of your creativity. That's an interesting way that I haven't considered before. Okay, so let's roll the dice. And I'll roll them both a few times, and then I'll show you what I do with this as I'm just walking around and contemplating. But I want to address this question that Ellie wrote first. Could you say that the 5th of the 10th is your work, creations, births, i.e. the second? Or is that taking it too far? Could you say that the 5th of the 10th is your work, creations, birth? Yeah, that's a really beautiful thing to see, Ellie. An example that I will share in our journey tomorrow, because if you're there live, Ellie, I know it's kind of late in the UK at 3 p.m. Pacific, but nighttime is the right time. You'll see that I will take us through what I call the hamster trine of 2 6 10 2 6 10 2 6 10 2 6 10 or 10 2 6 10 2 6 or 6 10 2 6 10 2. Why do I call it the hamster trine? Because we're kind of in this place of, if the second is my survival need, which in modern culture for many of us means I need money so I can pay the rent and eat, what does that give birth to? Well, birthing, fertility, the child is the 5th. What is the 5th of the second? The answer is the 6th. Right? So like this need for money births my toil, one of the many 6th house themes, that births my job, which births money, which somehow makes me even more committed to the hamster trine that we're just running on forever until we shift one of those things, right? So if the 10th, like Ellie, my experience of you is that you do what you are designed to do. And that, of course, is a rebellious thing, right? And so where did you shift? Did you shift from valuables to values? Because that will birth something different than toil will birth your sacred work. You can shift the 2 there. You can shift the 10 from job to vocation. I'm going to leave that there because this is going to be something that we focus deeply on in class tomorrow. But some of you will already be picking up what I'm putting down. Okay. Well, so if the 10th, is like not just some job that you have, and even if it is, the way I like to ask this when I look at the 5th, so like Ellie mentions that the second is the 5th of the 10th, what is it birth? Right. And so as she asked, like, could you say that the 5th of the 10th is your works, creations, or births? Exactly. That's exactly how I contemplate. What is the child of your legend is the way I would like to ask that, actually, because that's my word for the 10th, legend. But if it's just some job, right? Like I'm always surprised when I have clients who are like, yeah, I have this job and it's nothing to do with who I am. Not a big fan of it. But you know what? I clock in, I do it pretty well. even though I don't care. I have good ethics in that regard. Clock out, come home, and take none of it with me. Whether it was a stressful day or a super successful day, like that's there. And it pays for my travels, and it, all the things. Like having this job lets me live my life. Um, that for me is a little harder to understand than I do this thing that is just so descriptive of exactly who I am, which I think of more in the terminology of vocation. Um, but vocations don't always bring home the dollars. So says the guy laughing at himself, apparently. Um, but what does it birth? And, let's say you're an inventor. Are your inventions the second because they're the fifth of the 10th? That's an interesting question. Or are they the fifth? Because that's the fifth of the first, right? But anyway, this offers us more opportunity to explore the houses from other houses on the block. So if I'm only considering, the 10th is my job, that's because I'm only looking through the first. But if I go over there and look through the eyes of my works, right? So I just walked over to that house that's 90 degrees from mine in this cul-de-sac in which I reside, right? Well, now the first is the fourth of the 10th. And what might that mean? And Ellie has already told us that she will not be live for class tomorrow because Tora's got to sleep. Well, where is sleep in the nativity? Which is actually a really interesting question. It might be the first because the first is a place of general health and vitality, but sleep actually, the product of sleep is health and vitality. I don't think anybody's arguing with that. So is that the child of sleep? Because if it was, maybe I'd say sleep is the 9th. Because the 5th of the 9th, the child of the 9th, is the first. But you know what the 9th is? I think of it as a very daytime thing because the sun's moving through the 9th at midday and the 2 hours beyond. But the 9th is journeys. This morning, Koa woke me up and I was like, hold on just a second. So I just remember this dream. And I was like, oh, right. I decided that if I could find parking near this Mexican restaurant hotel where I was staying to go to that concert, then I would buy a car at the place nearby. Okay, cool, good, we're good, right? And let's rap about it, right? So, sometimes our dreams offer the most amazing journeys. And that's kind of an interesting thing to consider. And you are the fifth of your journeys. As you travelers like Ellie could certainly reflect. But I would typically think of sleep and rest as a fourth house thing. And interestingly, the first is the 10th of the fourth. So you are the job of your dream. That's easier to see actually when the fourth is parents, right? Like you're your parents' job. That's kind of a cold thing to say about you. You're so much more than just the job of your parents. But you're that too, right? Especially if they're clocked in and good parents and all that, but not too clocked in, so you can also be free. Talking about the inconjunctive, the fourth and the fifth right there, and also the square between the fourth and the first. Danielle says, I think of dreams as the 12th. Yeah, I typically do as well. But I would say that that's going to be kind of the result of the modern alphabetical, the 12th equals Pisces equals Neptune equals dreaming, where traditionally we would likely look more into the nocturnal houses, which means the houses that are beneath the ground and maybe the deepest. I mean, traditionally, the third is the joy of the moon. Anyway, I digress. But like, a fun way to explore that would be, okay, well, Taurus, right? We just heard Taurus got to sleep. Well, is that because Aries is the 12th of Taurus? Is that because Leo is the 4th of Taurus? Well, then it might depend where the sun is, since the sun is the governor of that sign. In Taurus, Capricorn is the 9th. So there's something to that. Anyway, let's roll the dice. So I'm just going to roll these two and then interrogate you. And I get Cancer 8. So what is the 8th sign of the Cancer design? Those of you who were around on Saturday will get to experience the very particular redundancy of my next words, since we did look at this one on Saturday. So who's got that? What is the 8th of Cancer? And by the way that I get there is I say, okay, if Cancer's rising, then Capricorn's setting. What follows Capricorn? Or let's use the house's terms, which succeeds Capricorn to the descendant to the angle? And the answer is Aquarius. So, well played, Winter. Speaking of winter, from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, this is a fun thing. It just says Winter, Aquarius, where the sun lives in the middle of Northern Hemisphere winter. Right, so now you get to play this fun game. If Aquarius is the 8th of Cancer, then, what is the 8th? Well, amongst other things, and that's important, the 8th is death. Typically, by the way, it's not your death. It's your experience of death. And therefore, it is also the place of the occult, which, we astrology students shouldn't sleep on. I was just I'm trying to find some cool chart examples for a lecture I'm giving at NORWAC at the end of next month. And I was looking through astrologer charts. And it was cool to see how a bunch of them had the governor of the 10th and the 8th. I was like, oh yeah, occultist. So a fun game you can play, I like to think of 8th as depths, which is a little bit more on like the rebirthing essence of the 8th than death, maybe. But let's just say death. Let's ask this interesting question. Why would Aquarius be the death of Cancer? And I'll sip some tea and just see if any of you want to offer an answer to that question I might read, so I don't have to think of myself. Think for myself. I'm just checking in Instagram here, and Ocean Leopard, Ocean Leopard, has this quote of the child of your legend, right? So let's just rewind there while I'm waiting for some of you to answer this fun little riddle of why will Aquarius be the death of Cancer? Yeah, think of that, the 5th of the 10th. So 10th for me is just your legend. We say honors, legacy, your reputation, how you're known, also what you leave behind, right? So that book you wrote. You know, in hilariously, in the you are what you buy culture, right? So one of the chart examples I was looking at last night too was Billie Holiday, who Billie Holiday made $250,000 in 1 year. I read on Wikipedia, so the CIA taught me, which is a lot of money in the 50s, 60s, which is probably when she made it, probably in the late 50s. She died with 70 cents in her bank account. Just a lot of money went to drugs and also abusive men, frankly, and then like $1,000 estate. It's pretty wild, but unburdened by all that stuff. So we live light, right? I'm laughing at myself when I say that. It's not my forte. I'm a bit of a hoarder and need to get better, and am improving. So in this kind of consumerist culture of you are what you own, right? Then it's kind of hilarious to think of, if that's your legend, then yeah, the second is your stuff, right? The child of your legend is your stuff, man. But if you're more interested in, hey, I brought light, and to the best of my ability, not on every day, but most, help to make this world a better place. Which house speaks that way? And the answer is maybe the second. Because the second isn't just valuables, and we've lost so much in that truth. The second is values. And I'll be sharing a lot more about that tomorrow, as I have in the past. And, so the child of your legend is, in a sense, your worth. But what if we could disconnect that word from the dollar sign that's typically associated with it in the blindness of the modern mind? Okay, let's get some answers about Aquarius and Cancer. Cancer needs to nurture. Aquarius needs distance. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Thanks, Ellie, for pointing that out. So, by the way, again, because we rolled Cancer and 8, and I asked what is the 8th of Cancer, and the answer, of course, is Aquarius, then there's this fun little riddle question of why would Aquarius be the death of Cancer? This one from Winter, releasing our emotional imprint to step into the uncertain future. Interesting, right? So, and that, I mean, we're also going to hear in some of these things, like how is Aquarius a great place for Cancer to be reborn? All right. Nadine, I'm going to leave that one to you. Pebbles Springs, because Aquarius cannot tolerate Cancer moodiness. Now that one might actually, so now you're speaking for Aquarius, not for Cancer, which is also cool. If Aquarius is the 8th of Cancer, then Cancer is the 6th of Aquarius. Just turn the wheel, right? When Aquarius is rising, Leo is setting. The 6th sets before the 7th. Leo sets before, wait, what's happening here? Cancer sets before Leo, right? If Aquarius is rising, Leo is setting, Cancer has already set. Cancer is the 6th of Aquarius, right? So then the question is like, why does Cancer make Aquarius sick? Now there's better places, like why is Cancer a really healthy practice for the Aquarius design to become more complete, which can be a 6th house thing as well. Traditional astrologers might reject that statement, but because Aquarius cannot tolerate Cancer moodiness, right? That one looks like Cancer is the 6th of Aquarius, not Aquarius is the 8th of Cancer, right? Now, the both are true, and it goes both ways. So Sunray offers here, so by proxy, Cancer struggles with Aquarius's detachedness. Right. So, a place I'll go here is, well, Cancer can often be indicative of family and the culture of your family, which isn't something we consider enough. Well, for many people, actually, it's the primary consideration, right? Because you were raised by somebody who has some idea of the world that you just actually despise and entirely reject, right? And you're aware of that like very young, growing up with racist parents or something and just like shocked by that. Who knows, right? Or some idea of, like, the old school, a woman's place is in the home, whatever, right? You're going to have to you're going to have to revolt against that, right? And Aquarius, in some ways, can speak to our revolution in a very open-mindedness, right? So Cancer, this isn't in any way saying Cancer is bad, right? But Cancer can be very like sealed into the container of its familiar conditioning. And can be, and in fact, like part of the Cancer journey, which is for me what I would say is part of the Cancer rising chart. Part of the Cancer journey will be to kind of break out of that sealed container of your familiar conditioning. And by the way, hopefully also come back to it, right? So we go on the heroine's journey and we bring this medicine back from the special world. All right. And so the Aquarius could be part of that time where there's just this revolt, right? And so, you grew up and you heard Jimi Hendrix and holy shit. Right? Like what happened to that classical music or that old stuff that your parents raised you on, right? Simple thing, but that's as simple as a flower, and that's a complicated thing. To offer some wisdom from the great David J. of Love and Rockets. Um, so here's another one, winter kind of rolling on Cancer as the 6th of Aquarius, right? So like the 6 is kind of it's an interesting place to observe. My one word for the 6 is practice. And, maybe I'll put one slide on the screen from tomorrow's class. And also last week's, because redundancy is built into every great space mission. Practice, health, and illness. Now, traditionally, it's just illness, okay, and toil, and slavery. Sacred work. It's a very different image. I think illness and sacred work are very inherently tied together. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who literally are ill and they find out they have gotten ill because they've been working some job that's just destroying them. I mean, sometimes literally physically, right? Like, great examples like body worker. And they spend so much time like helping others find pain relief, right? That they've now just toiled themselves into pain, right? So at some point we like need to shift these things, right? People just speak about the 6 as some service orientation where you can get trapped there, like, don't leave yourself behind, right? Interesting, the 6 from the traditional point of view is not viewed from the 1st. It's one of the blind spots, which is indicated in the chart here. So traditional health and illness, toil, misery, small animals, what? It's cadent. It's said to be a weak house because of that blind spot, that inconjunct to the ascendant. It's traditionally said to be the joy of Mars, right? These days, people associate the sixth with Mercury. They're just like sixth equals Virgo equals Mercury. Okay. Traditionally, planets rule signs. They rejoice in houses, and the sixth is said to be the joy of Mars. It's the place where night begins as far as the sun's daily journey through the houses. Said to be bad fortune, right? Host the sun's travel during the first and second hours of the night. Like for me, all those things want to come into this consideration. Anyway, people will often find illness, like physically, even spiritually, if they turn their back on their calling. That's a way where I see like illness and sacred work connected. And in this regard, the six can very much be a place where we can find a place to do some intentional practice, right? And then the first is the eighth of the sixth, right? So in that way, in your practice, you will be reborn, which for me is also a beautiful eighth house word. So my deepening questions here for the sixth, by the way: how can I better attend to my health? And what is my sacred craft? And how can I hone it? Right? Polishing the stone. So anyway, just, and by the way, that's not nearly enough to say about the sixth place or any place, but that's what fits on the slide without it being a terrible looking thing. So let's think about Cancer is the sixth of Aquarius, which is something that I'm hearing here in Winter's words, right? What if Cancer became an intentional practice, like a yoga for the Aquarian journey, which is what I see in the Aquarius ascendant. Again, traditionally Aquarius the ascendant said to be the rudder of the chart, right? It's very much your journey. It's said to be the ascendant youth, the midheaven, midlife, the descendant latter years, the IC, the tomb, and the womb from which we will rise again. But the ascendant also just the journey, right? The soul's journey. I work with the ascendant, and I believe it's embedded in the traditional language, like modern evolutionary astrologers work with the North Lunar Node, right? Like, so what you're learning, it's where you're growing, going. It's interesting because their nodal astrology is like, in that regard, is like 80 years old. Doesn't make it wrong, right? But I'm more inclined to some of the old poetry of the ancient astrology, which is much more connected, I find, to the astronomy, the embodied astronomical experience of the heavenly happenings. So take that for what it will be, please. So for example, Scorpio is the sixth of Gemini. I have Gemini rising as Scorpio sun, right? Like, how can I do intentional yoga practices in a Scorpio way? Like, it helps Gemini not be so fickle, right? Go deep. See what I'm saying? Don't get lost down there. Right? The Gemini mind can get poisoned in the rabbit holes. You see what I mean? But there's new light to find, and tasty carrots in those rabbit holes too. We just got to remember to come back and also explore the beautiful light which Scorpio offers as well. So in this example that Winter's put up, right, like Aquarius journey, let's not fall prey to that idea that Aquarius cares for humanity but not for human beings, and is cold and detached and Saturnian in those regards, and only mental, etc. Right? So try a little tenderness. That song came on as I was studying Billie Holiday's chart last night. I put on some Billie Holiday music at Spotify, and it did its journey, right? And I got to try a little tenderness. That's Otis Redding suggesting a Cancerian yoga for the Aquarius design, right? You got that. Exactly. All right, so you see the game that we're playing. All right, well, let me continue with the dice. But Winter, let me figure out how to put away your genius comment here. And by the way, it was hard for me to do because so many different comments have been coming through, which I'm honor so much. And for those of you who are here live, you're getting to witness that stream. I'm not going to be able to read them all right now because I'm going to move on a little bit further. So now we don't need the sign die anymore. we're in Cancer, right? I rolled what is the 8th of Aquarius, and no, we're in Aquarius. I wrote what is the 8th of Cancer, and Aquarius came up. So now we're just in Aquarius. And by the way, I'll just do this walking around, right? I'll have some thought and be like, oh my gosh, it's so Leo. It's so Leo. And then I might see a hubcap that has 5, geometry, a pentacle in the hubcap. I'm always looking at hubcap geometry, by the way, and I highly recommend it. It's very good for your consciousness, I find. This is another sister science of ours. Harmony is number in time, geometry number in space, right? Unlock yourself. So I see a 5. All right, what's the 5th of Sagittarius? Or is Leo? And the answer is Sagittarius. Well, how does Leo birth Sagittarius? Why is Sagittarius a zone for Leo to explore and express its passions? How is Sagittarius a place for Leo to awaken in its kind of divine child state? Like these are 5th house things. But anyway, we were, because Nadine loves a good wheel, and so do I. Let's say on the wheel where we were driving, and that was, what is the 8th of Cancer? And the answer, of course, is Aquarius, and we played that game a little bit. Maybe we didn't ask enough, well, how can Aquarius be a place for Cancer to be reborn, right? So the revolution is not a bad thing. Just don't lose your tenderness as a result, right? Be careful with the TV training that suggests you're not allowed to have any familiar connection with your uncle anymore because he wears some hat. Anyway, so now we're in Aquarius, and let's roll the die. I'm just rolling the house die, and I got 6. And what's the 6th of Aquarius? Cancer. So we're back in Cancer, and we already asked that question. How can Cancer make Aquarius sick? How can Cancer be an important and beautiful kind of practice, like a yoga for Aquarius to better reach fulfillment? So now we get the 5th, right? I'm back in Cancer. What is the 5th of Cancer? Anyone? Bueller? What's the 5th of Cancer? Now you can just go Cancer, Leo, etc. Or you can know that 1 and 5 is a trine. And this is why it's very helpful to work with whole sign houses or equal houses if you prefer to honor the ground beneath our feet, the ascendant, descendant degrees, which is the horizon, of course. Separating the above from the below. And it's very helpful to draw sacred geometry. And by the way, some of you, like Winter, have already been on this journey with me. But for those of you in constellations like Nadine and Ellie who have not, one of the focus shifts in constellations for this year moving forward is we're going to take a really deep dive with the planets, which I haven't actually gotten to do with a group of amazing fellow peers, fellowship, star student beings like Constellations before. We're just going to spend a month with the sun. And my beloved partner, Scorpion, is going to come in to help with this. She's going to host a coaching corner, but then I'm going to take us deeper through sacred geometry. So the sun these days, we draw with the circumpunct, right? The circle of spirit around that interesting point. What's the point? Let's find out. All right. And you don't find out simply by staring at that glyph, which you should until your eyes are blurry, but by creating. So in sacred geometry, it's heavy, but they said in the tradition, when you put the compass in your hand, you become God. And I'm sure that's because the geometer is studying creation through the act of creating. And I love those carrots. All right. So month 1, the sun. Month 2, the moon and the crescent of soul. Month 3, earth. The cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, Oh, Venus, I'm stoked to hear this. Yeah, Scorpion is a powerful being. I can tell you that much. Yeah, and I'm really, really excited for us to be co-creating more. So anyway, more about that coming very soon. And yeah, speaking of Anna, she's working on like the web page that I'll share in coming storytelling hours. And otherwise, first probably to my list. So if you're not on my mailing list, please be so. GeminiBrett.com is the place to go, and you will find on the homepage a place to sign up for the list. I don't mail stuff much. And we'll send you an offer to get involved with Constellations for you to align your star with ours and to take this journey through the planets this year. In contemplations in astrology and astronomy, cosmology, mythology, and in geometry, which I find to be a really powerful and telling way to get deeper into the mysteries. All right, where were we? We were at the 5th of Cancer, and winter, you're on it, Scorpio. So how does Cancer birth Scorpio? Why should Cancer be passionate about Scorpio? The 5th being a place of passion, romance, risks, games of chance, rolling the dice. It's a Cancer thing. It's a 5th house. It's a 5th house thing, not a Cancer thing. But that's kind of interesting because I tend to feel that Scorpio is a bit of a riskier sign than others. And I wouldn't necessarily personally think of Cancer to be deeply aligned in like a passionate design, but I would expect Scorpio on the 5th would do that. By the way, this might be reflected in quadrant house systems, like in Northern Hemisphere births, typically, not always, but typically a Cancer ascendant is paired with a Pisces midheaven and therefore a Virgo IC. And so you'll often actually see Libra on the cusp of the 5th of a Cancer rising chart if Northern Hemisphere birth, depending how far from the equator and the degree of the ascendant. In the Southern Hemisphere, Cancer rising is often paired with a Taurus midheaven and a Scorpio IC. So things to consider there, okay? But what I will say is this. My favorite word for Cancer is safety. And I believe that this is the ultimate role of clan. Now, clan might be more of the on the Capricorn side of the Cancer Capricorn pole. So Cancer inside your cave and Capricorn the collection of caves. Wait a second. No, I think we used to all live in the same cave. Anyway. But for me, that's part of the Cancer Capricorn thing, whether it's your parents or, Mother Russia or whatever, I'm saying there's something in that Cancer Capricorn pole that can be about the cult of your culture, what happens inside and outside of the home. But it's designed, we hope, right? Like even most libertarians are not anarchists. Small government, but some government to keep us safe. And we would hope, of course, some parents sadly work in the exact opposite way. That parents will keep us safe. And what happens if we are safe? What happens if there's tenderness? I'm wondering if I should go here. Yeah. This Scorpio sun sign, just before I came on to the storytelling hour, I spent some time with a lad in a room over there, Cancer sun sign, about the challenges of having divorced parents and going back and forth. Hopefully, offering safe space to explore how that feels and getting into the wisdom of the feels, right? And the hope is that's not like some pushing to go there, but an invitation saying your feelings are working for you, not against you. I gotta say that one of the weirdest things I ever heard in a reading, just because it was so distant from my own personal yoga growth journey wish, was I had a client, and this older woman came in who had been spending a lot of time in Freemasonic study. And I was kind of surprised to hear that, because one of the things you hear about Freemasonry is like, it's for dudes, it's a boys club, and that, there were other orders, like the Order of the Eastern Star for women or whatever, but in France, women started studying Freemasonry. Anyway, so this was like an older woman who had been studying Freemasonry. She came in and she was demonizing the Cancer moon of her birth chart, and how bad that is to get it kind of brings us back to that Aquarius has Cancer on the 6th, maybe. Like the Brotherhood might be the Aquarius in that regard. I'm not saying this is the ideal of Aquarius, by the way. And I, as an outsider, I probably don't know her, but in this example, like she had in this training had learned that tenderness and an emotional heart is a bad thing. Like that's going to keep her from ascending. I don't know. She didn't tell me why it's a bad thing. So all the rest is speculation, projection. And there's plenty of that around here. And then some. Anyway, but I almost spit my tea, Just like, so the Cancer moon is this bad thing, like, whoa. Weird. Anyway, my hope is that safety, tenderness, the science of the water, which is what we water the plants to help them grow. Cardinal water. My journey suggests that a safe space to explore and express the tenderness of the heart will actually birth a passionate experience where we can live according to our highest excitement. So my favorite Scorpio mantra ever comes from Bashar, some channeled entity, right? Not sure if I believe that, but I love the message. Follow your highest excitement with no expectations of where it will bring you, and take it as far as you can go until something more exciting comes through. Then do that. And this is the voice of your highest self leading you to when and where you need to be, always. Love it. And I often find clients who just have been disconnected from their passion, from their excitement. I hear you. I'll be out in a second. That's my curtain call, friends. And because we were taught that our fears are folly. People even in the spiritual realms will tell you fears are false emotions appearing real. There's no false emotion. Right? Right, and being around a crying child really also in a way helps, as difficult as it can be. So I'm also, by the way, considering that as Scorpio is the 5th of Cancer, Cancer is the 9th of Scorpio. That one, by the way, looks like if you're on the Scorpio job, go to Cancer University, because your family will drive you so nuts that it will rip the authentic heart open. But it doesn't only look like that. Again, try a little tenderness. So I'm very appreciative that Otis Redding came in last night and came in here as well. Rolling the dice, friends. I hope you'll keep it going and just keep them rolling. And as you walk around, like contemplate, what is the sixth of Virgo and what is the sixth of that and all like this, right? And then don't just move on. Dream into that, feel into that, explore. And you will find that there's 12 signs, but there's actually 144. See you in space, friends.